Welcome to the Human Flourishing Project. I'm your host, Alex Epstein. All right, it is December 28th, 2018, and it's time for our second episode on New Year's resolutions. Last week I talked about something that I think almost everyone should resolve to do, which is consume less news in the conventional sense, since most quote-unquote news is just information based on other people's agenda that is at best distracting and at worst really sabotaging of our own agendas. So listen to that episode if you are interested more in that. Today I want to talk about something a little bit more positive, and although not consuming news is very, very positive, I don't know if I can share anything as valuable as that today. But I just thought I'd share with you my own process for making resolutions, how I think about resolutions, and share with you mine, in part because that's going to help create accountability, which is something I'm a big fan of. I mentioned last week that I have a recording on YouTube called Resolution Revolution, and I'll probably mention it this broadcast, but I just want to make sure to remember. And that deals a lot with the art and science of how to keep to resolutions, which hopefully is interesting. Now, I think of resolutions as a little bit different from goals. I think we should always be setting some kind of goal. Not sure how universal it is, but I think it's pretty universal. And I think it's good to have goals, certainly in business and in other areas of life. And so I'm a big fan of just having processes for that. If you're interested in someone who has, I think, very compelling processes in this area, there's a video that just came out by a guy I'm a fan of, I've mentioned him before, named Sam Ovens, who helps people start businesses, and I think is very, very good at, as much as I've seen as possible, documenting here are the processes you should go through when you're considering starting a business. He has a lot of good material on goal setting and productivity, and he thinks a lot the way I do about things, and I've learned a lot from him. Sometimes I'll notice what he does and I'll think, oh, I should copy that, and it often works very well to copy. So he has on his YouTube page, it's called Tools for Planning the New Year. So if you just search Tools for Planning the New Year, Sam Ovens, Ovens, on YouTube, then I think you'll get some really good resources. Particularly, you'll see that about a third or midway through the recording, he'll talk specifically about goals, then how to set them, and then how to execute on them. He's also got some stuff at the beginning, which is pretty interesting, but may only be relevant to some of you, and it's about setting purpose and mission and values, particularly for a business, but it's also very relevant to any individual. So thought I would give that recommendation in terms of goal setting, since today I'm going to talk about resolutions, which I think about a little bit differently than goal setting. So when I think about goals, I think about what do I want to accomplish? What are the big things I want to accomplish in the next year? With resolutions, they're something I want to accomplish in the next year, but in particular, they are changes that I need to make in my life, or that I feel like I need to make in my life, that I wouldn't make in the course of normal goal setting. And it might be that there's an area of my life where even if I set goals there, I tend to not follow through as well. And so to classify something as a resolution to me means I need to do some significant behavior change. And that's going to mean I need to set some kind of conditions around this thing to make sure that it happens, because even if I'm living my normal life well, this kind of thing is not going to happen. So I think it's worth thinking of things in this category. Are there things in your life that you would really benefit from changing, but that for whatever reason, given your nature, those things are not likely to change on their own? They require some extra effort. Versus, for me, setting certain kinds of goals with, say, creative work, I'm pretty good at following through on those. But in other areas, not as much. So here's how I came up with my big resolutions for the year. And this is something you can definitely try as well. So on a sheet of paper, you can just write the following, right? And you'll have 3 columns. So you can write activities and then put a line under it. And then in the next column, put companions and put a line under it. And then in the next column, put foundations and put a line under it. And then under activities, you can put creation, first line, rejuvenation, second line, recreation, third line. And then in the second column, companions, you can put romance, friends, family. And then in foundations, you can put resources, location, physical health, mental health. So let me explain why I think of things this way and why I find this helpful. This is a way of just classifying the different aspects of life. And I see different people have different ways of classifying different areas. And sometimes they'll have, these are the 10 areas of life. And they'll have like fun and friends and stuff. And I find it helpful to divide things this way because it captures a lot of the overlap and interrelationship among things. So with activities, ultimately, all of life is activity. And I think it's a pretty good way of dividing it up to say, okay, well, sometimes I'm creating things. Sometimes I'm rejuvenating, which is, I've talked about a lot on this show, which is restoring myself to renewing myself to like my full creative state. But then there's also recreation, which we can separate out, which is that's what I do with my free time or my leisure time. And sometimes it may overlap with rejuvenation, but sometimes it's just, hey, there are things in life that I really want to experience, and they may not be directly creative or even rejuvenative, but they're things I really want. And it's a whole interesting question of how those areas should fit together, and that's a discussion for another show. It's actually something I'm thinking about a lot in 2019, but I think those are good areas to have. So that's ultimately your time is going to be spent doing one of those 3 things. And then companions, romance, friends, and family. So those are people that you can do activities with. And there's certain things might be hard to classify, like do you consider family, raising kids creative or recreation or rejuvenation? You might put it into creation or recreation. It doesn't really matter. The point is just that activities are either done alone or with other people. And it's worth thinking about that when you're thinking of the activities. And it's also thinking about how good am I at picking the people that I want in my life. So I think of thinking of companions as thinking about, who are the people in my life? Am I in my activities doing enough where I'm having a good relationship with them? And am I doing activities with them in a way that's really improving those activities? And a case where I think that this goes wrong is where people just say, I'm going to spend all day with my friend, but I'm not at all clear what we're going to do. And we end up just getting bored and not having much to talk about. Like that I would regard as a failure, where somebody's just thinking of friend in isolation and not really thinking about, okay, what activities do I want to do with the person? So in a sense, with activities and companions, you have almost all of your activity in life, including whom you're going to be doing it with. And then foundations, I have resources, location, physical health, and mental health. These I think of as foundations because these are things that are going to make possible and amplify all of these other things, but they're really just a means to these other things. So why do I want to be physically healthy? Well, ultimately it's so that I can live a certain way. Or why do I want to have a certain amount of resources? Well, it amplifies my ability to choose what activities I want and whom I want to do them with. And then in terms of something like mental health, that's, I want to enjoy these activities. I want to enjoy these people, and I want my overall life to be enjoyable. But it's important that these are foundational things that are present in everything else, or in most everything else. But they're different. So I find it helpful to separate these. So I'm not just thinking of, I've listed 10 different things, but I think of these as it's useful to think of them as these different categories. And then overall, so if you wanted to put a circle around all of these and then put overall, you could put them in a circle, and the outside of the circle would be flourishing, and you'd just be trying to get at, okay, these are the activities I'm doing, these are the people I'm living with, doing activities with, and these are the foundations that are going to allow all of these things to be as good as possible. And all of that is going into a flourishing life. So I find this to be a useful way of inventorying a life and your life. So you might want to try to do that. And one way you can do it, which I do, is I just look in each of these areas and I just think about what's on my mind in these areas. It could be things that I want, things that I don't like. When I'm thinking of resolutions, I'm not so much thinking of, let me set my most ambitious goal ever, although you can do that too. You can do this with goal setting. But with resolutions, I'm particularly thinking about what's on my mind in these different areas. And I did this, and I came up with dozens and dozens of items total. So I think it could be worth spending a bunch of a Saturday just walking around and thinking of these and writing them down. And then you'll probably notice certain patterns. And for resolutions, it's then worth thinking about, okay, what are areas here where a change would be really, really valuable, and where left to my own devices, I'm probably not going to make it. And hopefully it's a change that is not an insanely difficult change, but that is going to require some will and, in particular, some condition setting to make it happen, which is what I talk about in Resolution Revolution. So when I go through this, I look at, okay, where do I feel like I'm strong? And then where do I feel like, left to my own devices, I won't exactly get the job done? And long story short, it was really interesting for me. The two areas that came out where I felt like, oh, there's a really big opportunity here, but I can see in the way I normally am living my life, I could make big mistakes here, are health and resources. Now, this doesn't mean that I'm failing in these areas, but I can see if I think about what's on my mind, where I have weaknesses, where I have vulnerability, I can see, oh, in both of these areas, I have certain vulnerability. And so I'll tell you just my thought process there, and then what resolutions I've made, and then how I plan to do them. And then it would be great to have you share your own thought processes. What are your resolutions? And then you can put them on the Facebook page at facebook.com/Human Flourishing Project. So I'll start with physical health. One thing that's come up during the last year in particular is that I've had repeated occasions where I felt like, oh, I should ask a doctor about this. And then I realized I don't have a doctor that I'm really comfortable with and that I really think is great. Now, I have different people who can advise me on these things, and I have a very bright sister who's a doctor, and so that's helpful. But in terms of somebody whom I can actually go to in person, and I feel like I can ask questions and they'll have an overall picture of my life, I don't have that. And by the way, I apologize if I sound a little bit different today. I'm slightly sick today. God, I was in Milwaukee for Christmas, which had a lot of benefits, but I think it made my immune system more vulnerable. I'm not sure if that's actually how it works, but it certainly felt like it happened that way. So anyway, if I am swallowing a lot or sound a little awkward, I apologize. That's why. So in terms of health, just thinking about, I'm 38 years old now. It would be really, really valuable to have one, or maybe it should be more than one, but medical professionals that I'm really comfortable with, that I'm talking to about my health, and that I can ask questions to when certain things go wrong, or when certain things come up, or when I'm concerned about certain things. And I notice by not having that, there are just certain things that'll come up where I won't really get them addressed, or I notice that I tend to delay action and tend to delay questions because I don't have somebody to go through. And I think, okay, I'm 38. I've had generally good health in my life. I tend to get injured sometimes doing Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and those kinds of injuries usually aren't really scary long term. But statistically, as I'm going into my 40s and 50s and 60s, there are all kinds of things that can come up, and some of those things can probably be detected early. And there is all kinds of new technology that exists that will hopefully diagnose and prevent and predict things better. And in terms of where I am in my life, in terms of resources, which I'll talk about in a minute, but in general, I'm in a good position in terms of amount of resource that I have to spend, and it just seems like a big problem or a big missed opportunity that I'm not having a really good medical care situation. And thus, my first big resolution of the year, is find a doctor, or more broadly, maybe a medical situation that I really, really like, that I have a lot of confidence in. And I certainly welcome any recommendations. If you know anyone in Southern California, particularly Orange County, that you think is great, feel free to recommend that, although don't be offended if I don't end up going to them. But also if you think that any of the kind of concierge services or other services, there's a thing called Forward that I never really tried in San Francisco, but I know is now in Orange County. If you recommend any of those, certainly open to that. But in any case, this is something where I really need to dedicate the time. And to my point about why I choose to make something a resolution, this is something that I don't naturally gravitate toward. It's something that'll come up, and then maybe I'll have some problem with my elbow, and I'll think, oh yeah, I should have a better doctor, and then I forget about it. But it's something that I can easily see looking back on. If I got some significant issue, hopefully this doesn't happen, but if I got some sort of cancer and it was late detected and it could have been detected earlier, and it's just that I'm not seeing a doctor in the right way, that would obviously be a permanent regret. And it's very preventable, and I feel like I'm in good health now, but so now is the time to do that. So that's my resolution. In the next 2 months, I want to find a doctor that I really, really like, a primary doctor that I really, really like. And how am I going to make this happen? Well, I'm a big fan of accountability conditions, so just having somebody else hold me accountable. And I happen to have an assistant, Kelso, who produces this program, actually. And so I'm just going to tell Kelso, okay, by the end of February, I need to find a good doctor, and that is one of your goals for the year. So that's part of what you're going to get paid for, is me doing that. So that's an easy one, but that's one way to do it. But you can do this kind of thing with other people. But the key is I'm recognizing, okay, this is something I'm naturally not going to give, I'm not going to naturally assign the proper importance to in terms of time allocation, so I need to do that. Now, I mentioned the other area is resources. And in this case, the resolution is I want to make a long-term financial plan, Now, some people are by default very good at saving money for the future, and that's what their focus is, and they just think, okay, a third of my income or whatever is going to go toward investments, and they're really thinking about how much money do I need to do X, Y, and Z? How much am I going to need to put my kids through college? For instance, I think my dad is really fantastic at this. He's a very responsible person, and he's just been very good throughout his life at planning his and my mom's finances, and he just strikes me as somebody who is very, very on top of things. My own focus, which has its virtues but also its downsides, is I'm very focused on increasing my productive ability and increasing my earning power to the point where I can pretty much afford anything I want. And in part because my wants are in check, that's pretty much how I live, and I like that. But as I start to think about the future and things like starting a family and then even just pursuing different creative directions where I might have to forego certain income for a certain amount of time, I think, okay, this is an area of life where other people are doing a much better job because they have an idea of, okay, this is how much money I need to save, and these are my options with it, and just really having a relationship between incoming resources now and then the resources that I will want in the future. And this is an area where financial planners, I think, can be very valuable, or financial planners might not be the right I might not need an official financial planner, but I might need, say, to talk to my dad or one of my friends who's very good at this and just get their feedback on how to make a plan. And it's particularly timely because this year is a year where I have a new book coming out, 2019 is, and that tends to be particularly good for income from, at least from speaking, which is a significant source of income for me. And so that's a case where this might be the time where instead of some of the money that I might invest in the growth of the business, maybe I will save more money and make sure that I have those foundations in place. And what I'm expecting is once I'm really on top of that, I'm going to think, oh my gosh, it's so much better this way because I have so much confidence about the future, and then I can much more intelligently take risks. So it's a good thing that I'm very focused on expanding my earning power, expanding my value creating ability, but it'll be much better when that's supplemented with a real long-term financial plan that has all kinds of different contingencies in it. And that's another one where I want to do that in the first 2 months, by the end of February. I think both of these are very manageable. They don't take a super long amount of time. Certainly not the doctor one, but they do take some investment of time, and there are going to be just different difficulties with them. And it's just the kind of thing I can see. Oh, I'm working on a book and I'm working on other things. These will easily go to the wayside if I do not prioritize them. So also with Kelso, one of his goals is going to be making sure that I have a long-term financial plan. And often, now I'm not delegating it to him because I think I need to do a lot of it, but sometimes you can just delegate accountability to somebody. Just have somebody reminding you all the time, hey, if you don't do this, then you're violating this goal and you committed to doing this. You can associate money with it. You can do a lot of things. But in this case, I think somebody just bugging me on a daily or weekly basis should be sufficient. And if any of you want to bug me at any point and ask me, say at the end of January, hey, how's your doctor plan going? How's your financial plan going? I will certainly be happy to hear that. And if I'm not on track, then hopefully that'll help me get on track. So that's what I wanted to share today, just how I divide up the different aspects of life into the activity, companion, and foundation category, and then thinking about each of them and thinking about what would really improve my life that by default I'm not going to do, and then what are one or two or three things, and then what conditions can I put in place to make it almost inevitable that they will happen. So that is today's episode. Since it's the end of the year, I just want to thank everyone who, since the beginning of August, have been listening to this show, supporting this show. I'm glad that a lot of people are enjoying it. I've certainly found it really, really rewarding to do on a weekly basis. I haven't had as much time or allocated as much time for it as I might like, but I'm really proud that I've been able to do it just about every week, and that I'm growing doing it, and that a lot of other people are growing listening to it. So thank you all for listening. It'll be really interesting to see what directions this show takes next year. There are a lot of potential opportunities, and I have a lot of other projects that this will integrate with in different ways. But one of my big accomplishments for the year of 2018 is just that I got this started, that I started sharing some of these ideas, and that I'm developing them in one way or another on a weekly basis. And I've already seen with different audience feedback and even some potential projects that have emerged based on this, that it's really good that I started talking about these issues publicly instead of just keeping them private in my mind and saying, okay, at some point I'm going to launch Human Flourishing Project. So that's been one victory for the year, is just making continuous progress on this, even sometimes slower than I wanted, instead of just keeping it in my head. All right, my voice is fading. I can see my sickness is making it a little bit more difficult to speak than I thought, so I will wrap up with that. Hope everyone has a great new year, that you set some fun goals and resolutions, and that you set some good conditions for making them happen. I will be back next week. Not sure what the topic will be. Feel free to send any requests. You can email me at alex@alexepstein.com. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/humanflourishing. project. And the website where you can get weekly updates is humanflourishingproject.com. Talk to you in 2019. Until then, I'm Alex Epstein, and this has been the Human Flourishing Project.